Dr. Barbara Monsees, who has served as Associate Professor of Radiology at the Mallinckrodt Institute of Radiology at Washington University School of Medicine since 1990. She was appointed as Chief of the Breast Imaging Section of the Institute in 1993 and also serves on the Cancer Information Center Medical Advisory Board. Welcome, Dr. Monsees, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for presented were meta-analyses, multiple different meta-analyses, whether or not the Canadian trials were included. All of them were statistically significant. They ranged from 15 to 24% mortality benefit. It's very important to note at this point in time that randomized controlled trials inherently underestimate the actual benefit of screening, which is likely to be substantially greater than measured in these trials. In brief, I believe that if screened annually using today's improved mammographic equipment and techniques, breast cancer deaths in women could be reduced in women of all ages by 40% or more. In '93, the NCI set statistically significant mortality reduction as the requirement for accepting screening for women in their 40s. This requirement has now been met. This new data should have been a key factor in the panel's recommendation for supporting screening of women aged 40 to 49. Unfortunately, for as yet unexplained reasons, the consensus panel chose to ignore the recent data presented and base their statement on old data analyzed at the '93 NCI meeting. Whatever the reason...
Would you repeat what you think the consensus panel ignored, please, Dr. Monsees?
The consensus panel did not comment on the the Swedish trials that showed a 44% and 36%. Each trial alone was statistically significant. They gave an upper bounds of estimate of benefit at 30%. Whatever the reason the panel chose to do this, I think it is critical that we keep the scientific question of proof of benefit as the basis for determining guidelines. The issue of whether we should assign healthcare dollars to screening should be kept separate from this process. That's in your ballpark. If the purpose of this consensus conference was to analyze the new data, the panel should have either accepted the new data as proof enough to recommend routine screening for all women over 40, or they should have refuted it. They did not. In ignoring the new data, the panel's report reflects an unbalanced presentation of the facts and has, unfortunately, a surprising preoccupation with risks which are not unique to women aged 40 to 49. Clearly, the '93 NCI policy reversal created serious controversy and substantial confusion among American women on this issue. This situation was summarized in a report by the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Government Operations entitled Misused Science, the National Cancer Institute's Elimination of Mammography Guidelines for Women in Their 40s. The '94 report concluded that the NCI failed to examine objectively all the scientific evidence and excluded the presentation of favorable information. This seems to have happened again. Given the controversial history and complexity of the issue, I'd like to pose a few questions for your consideration that need to be carefully examined. Could this issue have taxed the NIH consensus development model beyond its intended purpose? Were the panelists given adequate time, information, and instruction regarding the rules of evidence in order to formulate their report? As an observer in the audience, I can surely attest that there was inadequate opportunity for comments from those with opposing views. What were the roles of NCI staff in the selection or exclusion of panelists, speakers, and topics? One can only wonder how the influence of those involved in the '93 NCI policy reversal played out in the formulation of the new panel in their report. Meanwhile, the panel's report has only deepened the controversy and the public's confusion on this important subject.
A moment or two, but I'd like to raise one question about the magical age 40, Dr. Leach and Dr. Monsees. Why 40? Why not 39 or 38? Why do you have a break point? My own sense from the experience I had would be to do it at an early stage if there is any concern And there is reason for concern about just about everybody. And you don't necessarily have to act on what you have found with the biopsies, et cetera. But what is the magic about 40, Dr. Monsees?
There is no magic about 40. That's a good point. What we do is we look at age-specific incidents. In other words, if you took women all in their 40s and compared them to women in their 50s and compared to women in their 60s, and you look at each decade of life how many women get breast cancer, it goes up with age.
Would you select the age 40 if you had the job of selecting an age?
That's a good question. I probably right around that time, I would say.
How about you, Dr. Leach?
Yes, I think it represents a break point in the incidence. 5% of the cases of breast cancer occur below that age. And then you go from a little more than 4.5% in the 30s to 18% in the 40s. So I think that that represents a reasonable break point. What I think has been, I have a perspective on that that may be a little bit different from some people here. Our teaching hospital is a county hospital in Dallas, and we see a large number of minority women. In fact, they account for about 75% of the women that we see in our screening program. And so in this population, we've been able to see the costs of taking care of women who are diagnosed late with breast cancer. And in our population in the 1980s and really up until the early 90s, about 40% of our patients were diagnosed with stage 3 or 4 disease, had never had screening mammography, had never had any introduction to what was involved, never entered the healthcare system prior to that time. When you have to take care of a woman with that stage of disease, the cost to the system, and whether that's federal dollars or state dollars or county dollars, is tremendous. Not only do those women have the cost of their care, many of them are young women who have children, they have jobs that require physical labor, they quit their jobs, they request disability, there's public assistance that's required. When they die, if their children are still minors, there's the support of those children that remains. Those types of costs are very hard to get into the record in terms of estimate. And in my view, when I'm looking at the dollars I would want to spend in our county hospital, I would say I would rather spend the dollars to detect the cancer early when I can treat it less aggressively, save money for the system, than to let people wander in with tumors growing out of their breast, which they do. I mean, we see this every week, and then have to deal with that tragic consequence. Well, I would point out that when we implemented a mammographic screening program in our hospital, the cases that were diagnosed of breast cancer in those women were far weighted to stage 0 or 1, whereas the women who were not involved in that screening program continued to come in with these very advanced cancers.
Mammography takes advantage of what's called the window of opportunity. We can find it perhaps when it's there and diagnosable, but that it hasn't yet spread, and we can alter the natural history of the disease. That's all it can do. It can't prevent or cure in any other way.